Ready?
Okay.
All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to get started. We'll ask you to please be quiet. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so thrilled to welcome you here today to our Kenosha Area Business Alliance Business Lunch. My name is Nicole Ryf. I have the privilege of serving as the president of CABA. I am really excited that we have maxed out this space here today. Our business community has really turned out, so thank you to all of you for joining us today. Really grateful to have you here. And it is my true pleasure and honor to introduce the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Austan Goolsbee. He's here today with us for a very special conversation about the economy and just really everything that we're all thinking about as a business community. So please join me in welcoming Austan.
It's great to be back in Kenosha for something besides just going to the brat stop.
We were thrilled to know that you knew about the Brat Stop. It is certainly an iconic location here in Kenosha. So welcome. You know, rather than going through your bio, which obviously we know is really
Wait,
impressive.
Nicole, you didn't tell them. Her parents met at the Brat Stop. That's literally where they met.
I don't know if everybody in this audience knew that, so I do have a special connection here. So thank God for the Brat Stop. Otherwise, I literally would not be here. So again, really grateful to have you here. And I figured rather than going through your bio, reading something off, I think it'd be great to hear from you about your career path and how you ended up in this job.
Oh, geez. I was born in Waco, Texas. My dad's family's from Waco. My mom's family from Abilene. They moved to California when I was a kid. When I was in high school, I liked public affairs and speech and debate, and I liked math and science. And I was uninformed, but I wasn't wrong that it seemed like economics was sort of a combination of the debate team and math and science. So I got into that, and I went to college and then got a PhD, and then my first job was at the University of Chicago Business School. And I fell madly in love with I had never spent any time in the Midwest, and then 30 years later, I kind of woke up and realized this is home, and that's the University of Chicago for somebody in economics. I used to say it was kind of like Disneyland was for when my kids were 10 years old. If you're an economist, it's amazing. The university is amazing. The city, the region, lovely. A guy that I knew mostly from birthday parties was named Barack Obama and was a teacher at the University of Chicago. And it's not every day that somebody you knew from the neighborhood becomes the president. But I went for the first 3 years of the Obama administration. I was at the Council of Economic Advisors. I came back to the university, and then the Chicago Fed, there's mandatory retirement at age 65. So you might have met Charlie Evans was the previous president, and his birthday was public knowledge. And so he was leaving, and I missed the mission-driven aspect of D.C. There are a lot of things that drive you crazy about Washington and policymaking, but it's very unlike academics in that you don't wake up every week and say, who cares? Nobody's even paying attention. Well, why are we doing this? And this job still had a foot in economics research. We have a very respected research department. Plus, it was policy. Plus, I didn't have to move. And so I applied for the job, and I got it. And I've been there about 3.5 years, and it's been lovely.
Fantastic.
For the most part. Yeah.
Every job is like that, right? There's some challenges, right? Well, I think something that would be interesting for us to talk about is the Fed in general, right?
Yeah.
So the average person, going back 10 years, probably had never even heard of the Fed. But the last 5-10 years, with everything going on in the economy, it seems to be the front page of every newspaper. But I think it would probably help all of us to know a little bit about what the Fed actually does and also what the Fed does not do. So if you share a bit about that, that'd be great.
That's a great way to ask it. The Fed does monetary policy, which is setting of an interest rate. It's basically setting interest rates, and we just do a short-term interest rate, and it's very kind of in the weeds. We don't do fiscal policy, which is every other thing except the setting of that short-term interest rate. So taxes, income distribution, environmental policy, all of that type of stuff is not that Congress does that, the president does that, and I always say, look, our Midwest motto is there's no bad weather, there's only bad clothing. You tell us the conditions, and we'll pick the jacket, and we're going to go do the job. And what Congress does is the conditions. We have to take that. If they put in tariffs, if they change some policy, if there's wars in the Middle East, if there are big shocks to the economy, we got to process that. The Federal Reserve Act gives us a job by law when setting the interest rate. We're supposed to maximize employment and stabilize prices, and that's it. We call that the dual mandate. That's the job. And we take that super seriously. My observation at the FOMC meetings is they come from different regions. They come from different backgrounds. They take that job really seriously. It's not about, what makes the stock market happy. It's not about what makes the president happy or the Congress happy. It's all about the dual mandate. That's the most public part of the job. Every 6 weeks, we all fly to Washington, D.C. and have an FOMC meeting and we decide on this interest rate. But, the Fed does more than just that, especially the 12 reserve banks that are not the D.C. Fed. We are bank supervisors, and the regulation, we don't set the policies, but we send the people out to the banks to make sure they're complying with the law and they have the capital that they say they have. We do financial services. We are, in a very real sense, kind of a bank to the banks. So they have a master account at the Fed, and if they want cash for their ATMs, they place an order. All the Bureau of Engraving and Printing prints all the money. All the cash in the economy is distributed through the banks, and if you come through Chicago, or if you're at the Detroit branch, we got vaults with an 80,000-pound door and a dual combination. It's like our nuclear secrets. Half the people know one combination and half know the other, and we got tens of billions of dollars in there, and we're running it in and out every day and pulling out the counterfeit. We run $6 trillion a day of payments, almost the majority of wire transfers, the majority of ACH, direct deposit transactions. $6 trillion per day is running over the Fed rails, and we're participants out in the community. And we're supposed to be coming out to places like this and hearing from you, talking to business leaders, talking to civic leaders, what's happening in the region. The Chicago's district is 90% of Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana. It's kind of heart of the Midwest. It's the most manufacturing intensive of all the districts. It's by far the most auto production of all the districts. And because manufacturing tends to be among the most cyclical parts of the economy, there is a sense in which, even though everybody's fiercely proud of their own district, they are interested, well, what's happening in the 7th District, because we're a little bit canary in the coal mine of the business cycle. So those are the things we do. Those are the 4. They talk about 5 functions of the Fed. I gave you 4. The 5th one is we're the lender of last resort and the protector of financial stability. And the Fed was created in 1913 following the panic of 1907 because people realized, hey, you better have a lender of last resort who monitors and does financial stability. That's a little more controversial because if you ever get to the spot where you're having to be the lender of last resort, somebody screwed something up, and so there's a lot of recriminations. But that's basically what the Fed does, and as I like to say, when I first started, I went and looked up the polling. The inflation rate was pretty high. Already, I didn't do it. I wasn't there. If you were upset about 2021, that was before I got to Fed. A big majority of the country, 75 or something % of people, said they were familiar with the Federal Reserve, but they did not know what it did. And then an even bigger majority said that while they didn't know what it did, they thought it was doing a bad job. And so I took some component of the job of these reserve banks. We're out in the heartland is demystify the Fed and explain. We're not magicians. Everybody who's coming. We got economists, we got market people, we got business people, different people sit around the table. And we're all just down there trying to do the job as is given to us by law. And we're not the bad guys. We're the guardians of the galaxy. I mean, our role is only on this much. You know, the world is as big as this. Ours is on this much. But at least in that part of the world, it makes a big difference what the Fed does.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about the physical money aspect of what you do.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how we would know if any of our money actually comes from the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank?
When you say comes from, that's doing a lot of work in that sentence. It's on the Chicago Fed balance sheet if, I'm going to have to do I have a one? I hope I do. Yes. Oh, yes. Look, here's a $1 bill. If you have a $1 bill, there's a letter. And if your eyes are better than mine, you can read it, and it will say what Federal Reserve Bank it's on the balance sheet of. This one says G, which is the 7th letter. And if you look at it, it says Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. So if you have the G money, you're on our balance sheet.
So we've got some swag in this area. We've got the G money.
We got the G money. I thought you were going to say, can you tell if it's counterfeit? And everybody who works in cash at the Fed has to be certified for counterfeit detection every 6 months. So when I got there, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, all this cash. I was like, I need the training. So now I'm certified for counterfeit detection. I can tell you that, too. If you want.
That's good to know. I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. One thing is you see those people lick it. Don't lick it. That's not a
pandemic
thing.
start.
Believe me, like when the money's been in circulation long enough that it's got all of whatever is going to get on there, we shred it. You do not want to be licking it. But there are various security features. If you hold it up to the light, you should see a little watermark. Like say you looked at a $100 bill. There's a little invisible Benjamin Franklin separate from the photo that you hold up to the light and you can see him. If you have a black light, flashlight, and you shine it, there'll be a shiny strip that pops. If you wiggle it, the ink changes color on the 100. One time early in the Fed, my wife came home and she was like, I found a $100 bill in the street. She was like really excited. She's like, this is amazing. She's like, is somebody at the Fed, can they tell if this is real? Because I don't want to use it if it's not real. And I was like, oh, yeah, they can tell. This is before I was certified. So I came down. And the woman who's the head of cash is named Amy Alvarado. I was like, Amy, can you tell if this is real? And I handed it to her, and it was like this. If she touch it like this, it's fake. I was like, what? What? How do you know that? She's like, I can just tell by touching it. That's definitely fake. And then she said, feel it? It feels like paper. It's not supposed to feel like paper. It's like the strip is supposed to be made of plastic. That's just toner, like from somebody's printer. And then she turned it over and printed in red all on the back were all these Chinese characters, and it said, do not copy. And she was like, you didn't even look at this. But so that's how you know it's Chicago money, and that's how you know it's real money.
Excellent. So we love real Chicago money.
Yeah.
Good to know. So, and sharing a little bit about what's going on at the Fed and what the responsibilities are, you talked a bit about how part of what you do is you go out and you meet with communities and businesses to hear what's going on. Tell us more about your actual job and what your day-to-day job looks like, because I'm sure it's different every day.
Look, sometimes that morphs into, why does Chicago have a Fed? Why is it different from every other government agency? And to add more to the mix, the 12 reserve banks that are around the country are not government agencies. They're actually not-for-profits, and each one has its own board that's made up of boards of directors that are local business leaders, local bank leaders, local civic leaders, and they're the ones who choose the presidents of the banks. They're not political appointees the way that the D.C. Fed is. The reason that exists is because when they created the Fed in 1913, just like today, people were deeply uncomfortable that the federal government, or the federal government plus the Wall Street banks, would collectively control the entire U.S. financial monetary system with no input from the rest of the country. So they created a system that automatically has regional independence in it, comprised of people who are coming from out throughout the country. And if we get into the real weeds of like how does the voting work, and it's a rotating mix. There's 19 people around the table, the 7 D.C. people and the 12 reserve banks, but only 5 of the 12 reserve banks are voting at any given time. So yes, it's a little bit kludgy, but that regional aspect has proven to be a little bit a stroke of genius. And unlike the First National Bank of the United States and the Second Bank of the United States, this one has stuck and lasted. And I think in large measure it's because you have automatic representing from the regions. So then you say, what does the bank president do? You're the CEO. There are a little bit less than 2,000 people work at Chicago Fed. Just 1,500 of them at the Chicago headquarters. And then there's a Detroit branch. And we've got a Des Moines office with mostly bank supervision. And then some folks sprinkled out throughout the district because there's banks all over the place. And part of the job of the president is a management job of making sure we're supervising banks, making sure that we're providing financial services in a compelling way. If you got as much money as we got a law enforcement unit. We got our own police force. And then getting out and being an upstanding member of the community and hearing from the business and other leaders. Plus, every 6 weeks go to Washington, D.C., and there's a whole, so of any 6-week period, let's call it 2 of the weeks are preparing for and going to the FOMC meeting, doing monetary policy, and then the other 4 weeks are managing the functions of overseeing the functions of the Fed that all the employees are doing, or getting out and talking to people and hearing about conditions.
Interesting. And I'm assuming that data analysis and understanding is a big part of what you're doing. And
Yeah, that's a whole
recommendations
job.
you're
That's
making.
the whole job, I think.
Yeah, and so, today obviously is a really big day from that standpoint. When we were connecting with your team over the last couple of weeks, who have been great to work with, by the way, they shared with us that today is a really big day in the world of the Fed and really just in the world of economics. So it is the day that the Consumer Price Index comes out for the month.
Yeah, the inflation came out this month, so
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like 4th of July for us, or
it's a big day.
That's a big day, but it comes every month. So if you didn't see it, the CPI came out this morning, and for this month, it was surprisingly benign, and inflation was lower than what it has been running, and that was nice, and it was a bit cutting the other way from what things have been for the last 6 months or so. But I always say 1 month is no months. You never want to overreact to 1 month. If we got several months like this, I would be feeling better. What I've been highlighting for the last several months is if you break out inflation into components, housing, goods, services. The services thing is the one that's made me the most nervous, because you could convince yourself that tariffs should be a one-time increase in prices, but not a lasting inflation rate increase. That should be one and done. But services don't really, they're not affected by tariffs that much. And they're not affected by the price of oil that much. So the fact that services inflation has been way too high, historically, services inflation is quite persistent. And so that's what I've been highlighting. That number has been making me nervous. At least today, at least for this one, the services inflation was very, was encouraging. And if we got more, not to get too far into the weeds, CPI inflation is one measure of inflation. It's not exactly the measure we usually look at. We look at a broader measure called PCE inflation, which includes some other prices. We got to see what those producer prices, how their inflation is doing, and we'll get that tomorrow. But if we got PCE versions of inflation that looked like what the CPI inflation was today, and we got that for several months, and it was clear we're back on a path toward 2% inflation, which is our target, I would be feeling a lot better. And I felt like before we got some of what I was calling the stagflationary dust in the air, we were on path to get to 2%, and the sooner we can show that we're headed back to 2%, I think the sooner we can normalize.
So it's hard to have a crystal ball, obviously, especially with all the volatility and the change that's happening in the world right now. But what should we expect this year when it comes to the interest rate and kind of what the future is looking like here? It's a big question.
Back up to that's a huge question, and I have never been a huge fan of forecasting. Here's what the interest rate is going to do. Even at the next meeting, I don't like even implicitly tying our hands or putting weight on the scale. I want to see what the data are coming in, and I want to hear from the other of the 19 people sitting around the table, because I have found it to be people take the job very seriously, and it's a really it's a wonderful deliberative body. It doesn't mean we still make mistakes. Because, like I say, we're not magicians, but it's a deliberative body. That said, I think that on the job market side, the fear in the middle of last year, expressed by a bunch of folks publicly, was that maybe the job market was falling apart, was deteriorating. My read of the job market is it's been remarkably stable, without being good. So it's not a super boom, but it's not falling apart. Almost all the measures have been pretty stable. And the thing that I think is a little misleading is there was a time when if you asked an economist, what's the thing? If you could only look at one number to tell you where we are in the business cycle, how the job market is doing, they would have told you, take the monthly jobs created number, payroll employment. Take that number. That's the best number. That has broken down as the leading indicator of the business cycle. It's not working because there are major question marks about population growth. A lot coming from immigration, some coming from labor force participation and the elderly, and now I'm going to count myself, over age 55. Traditionally had relatively low labor force participation. That thing's declining. Choices that people over age 55, let's call it 55 to 75, are making about whether they want to work longer, those make a huge difference in how many jobs are created. And we had 2023, 2024, really big jobs created per month numbers, which some people interpreted as we're about to overheat. And I started saying then, hey, wait a minute, that's not a great indicator of the business cycle because we're having a ton of immigration that you don't know that's adding to the population. And now we've seen the reverse side. We've had relatively weak objective numbers of jobs created, but the unemployment rate's been stable, and all the rates-based measures, the hiring rate, the layoff rate, the vacancy rate, the unemployment rate, those have been largely flat, and I think those are the best indicators of business cycle. So I still feel like unless we're getting big shocks coming from wars, pandemics, a lot of things have gone wrong over the last 5 or 8 years. But the through line has been stability in the job market. It doesn't feel like a super boom. And anybody who's got teenage kids or kids coming out of college, as I do, you know the hiring rate is very low. Okay, so if you just took the hiring rate, it's as low as it is at the depths of a recession. And so, of course, new graduates are going to feel that the most because they're disproportionately the new hires. But at the same time, the layoff rate is so low that you would think we're at the peak of a giant boom. That's no, people aren't getting laid off and people aren't getting hired. And it's worth noting that's a weird combination. That's not a normal business cycle combination. I think it's because there's a lot of uncertainty. And so business is just, they don't want to let go of the people. It's hard enough to get the people they got. But they don't want to bring on new people because they're like, well, what if everything switches? And I feel like on the job side, we're still going to see that. On the inflation side, we've had more of a problem. We were making progress from 3%, getting down and down. We were close to 2% for a 10-month period, let's call it. Then we stopped making progress. The tariffs came in. That was supposed to go away. We were kind of waiting for that increment to go away. Then the war started. The price of oil went up. Before that one had gone away. So we stopped making, I'm going to turn it backward for you. It was coming down, then it stopped going down, and then lately it's been going the wrong way. And it's inflation way too high, going the wrong way. And now we got to start having a conversation about, is inflation going to be more persistent than what we wanted it to be, than what the forecast was going to be? That, for me, has been thing I've been trying to grapple with, and why I've been as nervous about services inflation as I have, because usually if you got services inflation, that's not going away quickly. I'm heartened by this CPI today, but we need a lot more than 1 month to think that it's going well.
I'd like to dig a little deeper on some of the comments you made about just the general population and demographics and workforce. So something that we've been talking a lot about here in Kenosha County is the demographic cliff. So we're kind of on the precipice of that.
Yes.
We've been talking for a long time that the baby boomers are starting to retire, the silver tsunami's coming, the younger generations are smaller than past generations. We also have obviously a decrease in immigration, at least the last year or so with new policies. So we're really starting to have conversations here around how do we tackle that, right? Because we have all these great businesses in Kenosha County, but we don't have population growth, really through birth rates or through net migration from other states or regions. So do you have any thoughts at all on, what that demographic shift looks like in the Midwest as a whole, what you're seeing as some good solutions to that?
Well, let's go to the first part. I don't know the solutions. This demographic challenge, population challenge, has characterized much of the Midwest. Population growth's been slower than the rest of the country. And that's not a new phenomenon. Ever since they invented air conditioning, there's been a drift to warmer Sun Belt locations because they became livable in the summertime. Wisconsin, I think the unemployment rate in Wisconsin is like 3.4%. Okay, so Wisconsin is kind of in labor shortage mode. And if you talk to business people, a lot of them say, I can't find people. It never actually got better. We were in an unbelievably tight labor market, and it's still a really tight labor market. I do think that you call the silver tsunami, the retirement of the baby boom, and before are they Gen Z? Whatever's the reflected of the baby boom. Actually, it's even bigger than the baby boom, but there's going to be a big dip for several decades in between. And while that happens, we gotta hope that the young people aspire to careers and can replace the folks that are retiring. If you talk to the people that are retiring, they're less optimistic about it than the people coming in. But before you get too worried about that, one thing they're expert at the University of Chicago is what do they call the oldest cuneiform writing? Okay, where they punch in the clay tablets. And I once talked to a guy who's a world expert on. He can read this thing. And I said, what do they write about? What is it? What did they write? And evidently, a lot of it was accounting. It was like, you have 12 sheep, and we owe you. Some of it was kings saying how great they were. There's love poems. And then there's old people bitching about young people, and they've abandoned the traditions and the thing. So I think it's still going to be fine. The technology is changing, and maybe one upside is if there is a rise of AI that enhances the productivity of the people where they are in the jobs, maybe that can span a little bit of the demographic bust, but that's a challenge facing the whole Midwest. There's no two ways around it, and most of the solutions move you into fiscal policy. The Fed is kind of about the next 6 weeks, the next 6 months. Where are we in the business cycle? If it's like, how do we invest in our workforce training so that 20 years from now, young people today are well set up, that's kind of got to be the states, the Congress, and the businesses themselves. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I'm encouraged by that because the success of the economy does not rely on some government bureaucrat deciding who should be working in what job. Everybody has an incentive to find jobs and get the training for something that's going to be a meaningful career. And the businesses want those people, and we got to kind of rely on some market mechanisms there.
That's helpful. When we talk to our business community here, it's largely, manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, which I'm sure you're well aware of. You drive on that I-94 corridor. You've seen all the development that's happened over the last 20 or so years, and we really benefit from that. We've got a great business community here. I know you talk a lot about, just the value of manufacturing in our region. How do you rate kind of the success of our corridor and the health of it, and what do you see as some of the pressures, on supply chain, logistics, and manufacturing right now?
Oh, look, I rate us number one. We're the greatest of all the Fed districts. But, and the numbers show it. I mean, we have the most manufacturing. Now, that does mean that we are exposed to geopolitics and worldwide shocks and stuff more so than anybody else. So when the tariffs came in, there was an analysis done by Brookings. What states are the most exposed to tariffs? And literally, of the 7 most exposed states in the nation, 4 of the 7 were of our 5 states, because we got a lot of agriculture, we got a lot of manufacturing. The supply chain, to some people, that's an inflation shock. These things affect just inflation. But if you're manufacturing, that's a cost shock too. And those supply side shocks, which seem like they've gotten more frequent. And if we backed up 10 years, 20 years, and you were asking economists, how important is the supply chain? Most people wouldn't know nothing about it. And in a way, that was one of the most important roots of the problem of team transitory when inflation started jumping coming out of COVID. A lot of that, I think, was coming from the supply chain being as damaged as it was, and us just assuming, it's just a supply chain, they'll just fix it. But that takes longer. That's harder to do. So I think those supply chain aspects are they a threat? I guess they're kind of a threat. The biggest vulnerability, not threat, vulnerability is that the last 6 years have taught us that those things can go wrong in a way we didn't fully appreciate. And the focusing the supply chain to be global and single sourced because that's the cheapest. It is the cheapest, but it also is the most vulnerable when stuff goes wrong. So I do think we're going to have to still confront those issues here in the Midwest. But we've also proved pretty resourceful. I mean, if you look at businesses, I was down in Indiana, and the RV manufacturers, they were affected by the same supply chain components that were affecting the auto industry. But we're going to try a totally different way. We're going to find workers. We're going to find people. We're going to find different forms of the supply chain which allow us to keep producing in a way that an industry as big as autos wasn't able to. Small versus medium versus large manufacturing firms. There's a little bit of dynamic of that. It depends. It depends how big you are.
Makes sense. And you talk about the supply chains be disrupted in a way that we really couldn't have anticipated. And I think that leads to another good question, which is, I think a lot of us in this room feel like we are living in unprecedented times. Yeah, every day you just open the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, right?
If you have a 1 in 100-year flood every year,
right.
It's like either stop calling it a 1 in 100-year flood, or
right.
If each one is bigger than the last, maybe it is a 1 in 100-year flood. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And it just seems like one thing after another with wars and tariffs and pandemics, you name it. So are we living in unprecedented times?
It feels like it. But look, that's our Midwestern sensibility. It's like, wow, this thing is terrible. Well, we got to get out and fix that.
Get on with it.
It's like if the toilet's stopped up, you're like, you got to fix it. Like, what are we going to do? Like, it's not pleasant, but that's the job. And look, the Midwest. If I had told, just back up 10 years ago. If I told you, hey, what is going to happen? We're going to have pandemics. We're going to have wars, and the price of oil is going to go to $100 a barrel. And well, like, you can't buy computer chips. You can't buy all of this stuff. You would have thought, oh my God, how will we fix that? Well, we did. And it's disruptive in the moment. And I don't mean to make light of the adjustment costs and the pain that every business and every community has had to go through in these things. But ultimately, that adaptation, in the Midwest, we've been doing that for many, many decades. If I'd have told you we're going to have the biggest tariffs in 130 years and there would be a whole bunch of parts, components, and supplies that wouldn't be exempted, then it would be whatever, April 3rd, 2024. I'm calling the manufacturing folks throughout the district. Their hair is on fire. Like, if these tariff rates come in, we're going to die. This exceeds our entire margin. They're able to figure out and adapt, and that's the way it has to be.
Mm-hmm. And one of the areas that have been really impacted by a lot of what you're talking about is housing. And that's something we're talking a lot about here, affordability. I know the Fed's doing some work in that area. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. Look, house prices are way up. And when economists talk about housing, we tend to talk about rent, not sale price of housing, because part of when you buy a house, part of what you're getting is an asset. So it's a form of savings. The housing inflation part is just a rent. That said, it's worth noting there's been an extreme divergence in the last couple of years between house price inflation and the inflation of everything else. That's been extreme lately, but that's not new. It's actually been decades. This has been happening for decades. House price inflation was 3.5%, 4% a year. Goods price inflation has actually been mild deflation, so like minus 0.5% per year. Over 20, 30, 40 years, I don't need to tell you that if you have a thing compounding, plus 3.5 minus 4% per year for 30 years, the relative price of buying a house versus what you can buy a TV for in Costco is going to be really different. And so when young people today note, my grandpa had one salary, never went to college, bought a big house, and I went to college, did all the stuff, and I can't even afford a condo. They're not wrong. That is the relative price of housing has gone way up. And part of that is just my inner economist is like, if you want the price of housing to slow down or go or even fall, you got to build more houses. Right. Part of it has been we haven't built enough houses. But I got to tell you, this is pervasive all around the country. We went to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which is not a giant metro area. It's not a land use regulation, New York City or something. I asked them in Cedar Rapids, what's the biggest challenge facing the economy of Cedar Rapids? They said, price of housing so high, we can't get anybody to move here. And so if in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, they're dealing with housing affordability issues, and in San Francisco and Chicago and Milwaukee and Kenosha and every other place, we do need to have a rethink of housing in the context of the price of everything else.
Absolutely, and that's something we're thinking a lot about here, trying to invest in. So I have a couple of questions that were submitted in advance, so I'll probably get to those. But before we do that, I do want to take a little bit of a different tack here. No. Okay. So, in the lead up to this conversation today, I did a lot of studying. I'm not going to lie. I treated this like a grad school research project. I wanted to feel like I could know you a little bit and ask you some good questions. And every podcast I listened to, every interview I listened to with you really reminded me of a pretty iconic quote from one of my favorite movies, which is Mean Girls. When Amy Poehler, as Regina George's mom, says, "I'm not like a regular mom, I'm a cool mom." And I just kept thinking, like, you're not like a regular banker, you're like a cool banker. Like, you take
I'm
these,
gonna take it. I'm gonna take it.
You take these really complicated topics and you bring levity to it, you bring humor to it. So I have a couple fun questions for you, if that's all right. So, obviously you have a really interesting job. What have you found to be the most surprising thing about that job, and what is one of the coolest things you've been able to do as a result of being in this position?
The most surprising, I didn't know anything about the cash in the basement of the Fed. And I showed up and they were like, "We got $35 billion. Do you want to see it?" I was like, "Hell yeah, I want to see it." So I went down, I was like, "Wow." And the machines are like counting, and I was like, "This is incredible." So that was the most surprising thing, and I still delight in taking people on tours. They had their annual evaluation report from the cash department, and they were like, "We did 42 tours last year." And I was like, "I think 28 of them were like my friend. I took my mom, I gave my friends. I got everybody."
Love that show and tell.
That was the biggest surprise, and that was wonderful. The FOMC meeting itself, the content of the meeting wasn't a surprise because it's monetary policy, and if you're an economist, like, you've been thinking about those issues. But the physical meeting room is also like really pretty neat. There's a giant table, and everybody sits around the table, and they put down the shades so they can't be spied on, and you're required to leave all your phones and everything out of the room like it's a situation room. And then people take the job extremely seriously. They're going to go around the table, and it's like, "Jay Powell, day one is about the economy. Day two is about the rates. Jay Powell, what do you think about the economy?" He's going to give us, and you're assigned seats. So I sit between the president of San Francisco and the president of Minneapolis every time. And they're going to go around, and it's really fascinating. And if you're an econ head, it's pretty great. The other thing, and the pleasure of being back in the, if you talk to anybody at the Chicago Fed, these people are believers. I mean, they could be working in the private sector and making more money than they make at the Chicago Fed. They've chosen to do this because they absolutely believe in the mission, and that's wonderful. And there's a lot of bureaucracy in the Fed, as you might. Like, I went into academics because most people become professors because they can't deal with having a boss, and they can't deal with hierarchy, and they can't deal with, and my wife one day was like, "You hate bureaucracy, you hate authority, you hate other things. Why did you take a job at the Fed?" And so there is a little bit of there's a conference of presidents, and we have to work and come to consensus, and it turns out consensus is really difficult. So that's been every FOMC meeting, they put out a collection of the anecdotal information that the banks have gathered, and it's called the Beige Book. And it used to be a book that was beige that was put out. Now it's a PDF file. I don't know. And there was like a Beige Book working group, and the Beige Book working group assigned, it must be a 2-column format, and the cover is too beige. It needs to be something else. And those kinds of surprises, big organizational surprises are less fun.
I believe it. Yeah. So, when you've talked about those meetings in the past, and just when you talk about our region in general, you talk about conversations you have where you're promoting what's great about our region to your peers. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about what you view as what some of our greatest assets are, and bonus points if it's anything from Kenosha County or Wisconsin?
I'm not supposed to talk about what is said in the FOMC meetings. Mm-hmm. It's a secret until 5 years, and then they release the word-for-word transcript. So you can look those up. That said, I may or may not have had one of my comments. I always try to bring the love and the bragging for the 7th District. More than one has been about Wisconsin. I may or may not have mentioned the Mars Cheese Castle, the cheese production in Wisconsin, the awards won, et cetera. So that'd be one style. Sometimes there'll be things like the Butterball hotline, for the turkeys. It turns out that's in suburban Chicago. The Butterball hotline is, and the former president of the Chicago Fed's wife staffed the Butterball hotline at Thanksgiving. So I was like, if we have a meeting that's on Thanksgiving, or not on Thanksgiving, but around Thanksgiving, there's usually a November meeting, I'll highlight, the Butterball hotline, or something like 90% of the edible pumpkins in the United States are grown within a 100-mile radius of Peoria, really? Illinois. So I will say, there wouldn't even be a Halloween if it weren't for the 7th District, so it'd be stuff like that.
It's a big statement.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, well, it looks like we've got maybe time for 2 more questions. So I'll ask you one that was submitted by one of our audience members. So obviously there's been some big news lately with the new chairman of the Fed, with Kevin Warsh being the new chair of the Fed. What are your impressions of him, and where do you see him taking things?
I don't know. I'm not going to get myself in trouble. I told you, I'm only supposed to speak for myself, not for what anybody else thinks or what the committee thinks or is going to do. That said, I knew Chairman Warsh when he was just Kevin Warsh, Governor Warsh, back in 2009, 10, 11. When I was there at the beginning of the Obama administration, that's when he was on the Fed as a governor. And I worked closely with him. We would meet every month, the CEA and the Fed governors. So as I described, it felt like we went through a war together, and we were in a foxhole. And we came from totally different backgrounds. He was from banking. I was an academic. He was a Republican. I was a Democrat. But I got to see him in a very stressful moment, and he's level-headed. And if he came to the job, I kept saying, if he comes to the job with anything like the seriousness that he had then, it's going to be totally fine. And so far, that's what he has expressed different ideas about communication, about forward guidance, and the dot plot and things like that, the balance sheet. It's, I think, healthy for institutions to go through reexaminations periodically, and a lot of times you can do that when a new person comes in as the leader. Let's rethink those on all counts. And so I've been impressed. I mean, he hasn't been there for very long. Mm-hmm. I was prone to like him as he was coming in, like I say, because I went through the financial crisis with him. He's announced a series of task forces with really pretty people of high stature from outside the Fed to think through issues like inflation, AI and productivity, the balance sheet. And I'm going to be interested to see what comes out of those, because I think it's a moment where we can revisit some of the things we took for granted.
That's great. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. Before we wrap up, I do have one more question for you. I'm just curious, just as a final thought, what makes you most optimistic about the future of the U.S. economy?
I told you, the Fed is really about the kind of the short run in the business cycle. The reasons for optimism of the economy are none of that. It's all the long. If you plot, I got to know the investor Warren Buffett a little bit back in 2008. He was an Obama supporter, and I met him at some events. And if you ever meet Warren Buffett, he has all these quizzes. He'll give you a little quiz. And he asked me, what do you think the Dow was in 1900? And I was like, there was a Dow in 1900? Like, what? And the answer was 50. The Dow was at 50 in 1900. And then he started saying, imagine if you could go back to 1899, and the Kenosha was here in 1899, right? So we're having the meeting in 1899, and you bring the list of everything that will go wrong in the next 127 years. You got a hell of a list. You got pandemics and world wars and hyperinflations, Justin Bieber, whatever's going to go wrong,
right?
Whatever's going to go wrong. And then imagine predicting then what is the Dow going to be in 2026. And the people are going to be like, 90? Maybe 90, maybe be down to 40, and it would, how do we get, 30, 40, 50,000 on the Dow? The answer is because the innovative capacity of everyone in the world, but especially the American people, have proved totally unbounded. That's how we became rich. And we're going to look back. If you plot from 1789 for 250 years to the present, wait, that's more. It's not 250. It's 250, but whatever. From 1776 to the present, the thing, there's dips, there's whatever, but it's basically a straight line up. And so we're going to come back in 30 years, 40 years. We're going to remember, oh man, it was such a difficult time. But it's basically going to be fine. I don't see how you can look at that graph of per capita income in the United States for 250 years and not be a total optimist. And just go talk to some young people. It's going to work. We're going to have to figure it out. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to work.
Well, definitely encouraging words, and we appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for taking time with us. Thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's great.
Thank you.
All right. That wraps up our program for today. Thank you all so much.